All right, the bell has rung. They have called my number and I'm running into the ring. That is right. I am here to bring wrestling between society. It's a podcast that's about how wrestling relates to society and how society relates to wrestling. Just like anything else in the free market, a lot of things intertwine. Society can do without wrestling, and wrestling cannot do without society. They need each other. They're beneficiaries to one another. In this podcast, I want to show on how wrestling influences society, or maybe it's the other way around. Society influences wrestling. That's what it's about. It's about how wrestling and society relate to each other. So there you go. Welcome to Wrestling Between Society. All right, just like with any beginning of a podcast, the one likes to share how they got interest with professional wrestling. So I'm going to kind of do that cheesy thing right now and get it out of the way. I traced my beginning of professional wrestling to about 1987. 1987 was the year of WrestleMania 3. After that, it was the biggest professional wrestling event that ever took place. Vince McMahon's dream title of WrestleMania grew, and it is one of, if not the biggest professional wrestling events in all the industry. You could comment whatever you want. You could like WWE, you could hate WWE, you could love Vince McMahon, or you could hate Vince McMahon. Your opinions does not matter because it is a fact that WrestleMania is the biggest professional event of all of the industry. Whenever the mainstreams think of professional wrestling, what do they think about? They think about the WWE. Whenever they think about a professional wrestling event, what do they think about? They think about WrestleMania. That is the world that we live in, professional wrestling. Anyhow, just like anybody that grew up in the late 70s or 1980s, they got into professional wrestling because of the WWF, the World Wrestling Federation, and I was no different. In 1987, I was living in South Korea because my father was a U.S. soldier, and he moved my family there. And to go back and think about on how I was able to get access to professional wrestling was very interesting. Now, I didn't think about this stuff at the time when I got into wrestling, but over my 4 decades on Earth, I tend to get a little bit more an overview. And that's what you're going to get in Wrestling Between Society. You're going to get an overview of wrestling and society to see how they relate. Now, not to go too far down on this rabbit trail, because I just want to briefly tell on how I got involved in professional wrestling as a mark. That's right. I refer to myself as a mark. I have no problem with it because every wrestling fan or even professional wrestling are considered marks. I don't care who you are or what you've done, you're a mark. We're all marks. Well, back to 1987. It was WrestleMania 3. And Hulkmania took off like a rocket ship. As a 5-year-old, I was drawn to guys like He-Man, Superman, and all the Muscle Men characters. What set Hulk Hogan apart was that he was real. He looked real. And that's who drew me into professional wrestling. Fast forward 3 years later, 1990, WrestleMania 6. I was an elementary student back in the United States, and I'm walking into the video rental and I see the wrestling tapes. I see the cover of WrestleMania 6, The Ultimate Challenge. So I grabbed it, rented it, and went home and watched it for about 5 or 6 times over the weekend. From that point on, I was hooked. A while ago, I mentioned my dad was in the United States Army, so we had to move around a little bit. Well, whenever we moved to a new place, guess what I did? I looked for a local TV section, and I found where was wrestling. I had to find when was it. When was WWF Superstars? When was WWF Challenge? And when was WWF Prime Time? And in 1993, we were introduced to Monday Night Raw. Fast forward 2 years later, WCW comes and counters Monday Night Raw with WCW Monday Nitro. And yes, I'm on coffee. I'm all fired up for Wrestling Between Society. Now, I'm not always going to be all this fired up because I am going to tone down just a little bit. I want people to kind of get in and listen to what I have to say. I don't necessarily want to sound like a crazy caffeinated maniac. Well, I began with the WWF, and then later in middle school, I discovered another professional wrestling organization, WCW. Well, in 1991, Ric Flair came to the WWF, and just like a lot of WWF fans that did not watch NWA or WCW, you asked the question of, who is this guy? And I became hooked. And probably since that time, I was a Ric Flair fan ever since. And to this day, I am still Ric Flair's fan. Definitely, for sure. Well, there you have it. You kind of have an idea on how I started getting involved in professional wrestling. It started with the WWF and then went to WCW. And I can say right now that even though I am a WWF/WWE guy, I appreciate all wrestling promotions. It's good to have a lot of promotions in the industry because it creates competition and it's great for everybody. I have no desire to see a promotion go out of business. If you're that kind of mark, then you gotta stop being so much tribal and enjoy what's being seen. Over here at Wrestling Between Society, brought to you by atopguys worldwide. To close out the introduction of Wrestling Between Society, I kind of just want to give you a little general preview on the surface. I'm not going to get too deep on these topics and subjects yet. What topic or subjects am I talking about? One of the things that interests me about society when it comes to a relation in professional wrestling is that society teaches professional wrestling like the half-sibling. You know, if you read the book of Judges, there was Japheth, the first son. He was a son of a whore. His other siblings didn't like that. They chased him out. But when they needed him to go fight, they came looking for him. A lot of businesses and networks are like those siblings. They kind of disregard professional wrestling. But when they need them, they come with a big money bag. All Elite Wrestling is a great example of that. This past year, CNN kind of threw up on the bed for Time Warner. CNN thought it was a brilliant idea that you pay people to watch their news. They must have never looked at their ratings. When your ratings are in the tank, why in the world will people come and watch you? Because of the failure of CNN Plus, Time Warner has to go clean house. A lot of TV shows get canceled. Television networks such as Discovery, TNT, TBS, and whatever network they own are looking to kind of merge together. That's what happened this past summer in the Time Warner house. There was a little bit cleaning going on. And I'm not going to lie that I was a little bit worried about All Elite Wrestling because Time Warner's history with professional wrestling, like with WCW, shows that they were never interested in the professional wrestling business. That's why they were willing to sell WCW to Vince McMahon, who recently paid more for sex than buying WCW. Go Vinnie Mac. Well, anyways, I was worried about All Elite Wrestling. Towards the end about my story and how I got involved in professional wrestling, I was sharing that I don't want to see any professional wrestling company go out of business. I believe All Elite Wrestling is great for the industry because for a while the WWE did not have any serious competition. So when All Elite Wrestling became real in 2019, it kind of changed a little bit. WWE tried a little harder with their storyline telling. Guys like Randy Orton, Edge, and The New Day got paid so WWE would not have to lose them to All Elite Wrestling. Well, with CNN Plus throwing up in the bed at Time Warner home, I was worried for All Elite Wrestling. I thought maybe they could end up losing their TV contract because, like I said, because Time Warner has a history of not being that much interested in professional wrestling. Well, as of right now, it turns out, or it seems, that All Elite Wrestling is very valuable to Time Warner. Now, did all of a sudden Time Warner become a wrestling mark? Doubt it. Anyways, that doesn't really matter because Time Warner is looking for ways to keep their ratings up. They are looking for viewership to stay on the high end. Well, it's a fact that All Elite Wrestling Dynamite has constantly finished number one on Wednesday nights. And past month, they've been hitting the 1 million mark like 3 or 4 times in a row. Professional wrestling is a hotbed. So networks trying to fill in their TV gaps and increase their viewership are at the door with the money bag to try to get professional wrestling that is kind of like that half sibling. With what I said is example of what you're going to be hearing on Wrestling Between Society. In the future, I want to talk about this past year's Oscar with the infamous slap. The infamous slap of Will Smith on Chris Rock is a perfect example of professional wrestling in society. So, you're welcome from Wrestling Between Society.